Some bad news for Fox, as a judge in New York's Supreme Court Appellate Division has ruled against Fox's efforts to dismiss a $2.7 billion defamation case against the network. The company that brought the case is Smartmatic, which now joins Dominion, also currently moving forward with its own $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit against the network, and that goes to trial in April. Both lawsuits focus on Fox News knowingly spreading the lie that these companies helped steal the 2020 election from Donald Trump. And while it's certainly newsworthy that the Smartmatic lawsuit is moving forward, I want to focus on the Dominion lawsuit here, considering we now have a trove of newly disclosed messages and testimony from a number of Fox personalities, including Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham, insulting and mocking people like Donald Trump, Sidney Powell, and Rudy Giuliani for perpetuating claims of a stolen election, while simultaneously then going on air and promoting those exact same figures and the claims that they were making. According to the filing, from the top down, Fox knew the Dominion stuff was total BS, yet despite knowing the truth, or at minimum recklessly disregarding that truth, Fox spread and endorsed these outlandish voter fraud claims about Dominion, even as it internally recognized the lies as crazy, absurd, and shockingly reckless. And just to give a few more concrete examples, here's what we now know thanks to texts that have been released. Laura Ingraham said Rudy is, quote, such an idiot. Sean Hannity said that Rudy is, quote, acting like an insane person and referred to him as an effing lunatic. A Lou Dobbs producer called him so full of shit, with another producer calling to keep in mind Rudy's insanity. And yet, here's who they put on air regardless.
Already documented to overturn the result in that state, because not only did they use a Venezuelan company to count our ballots, which almost should be illegal per se. Number two, they didn't allow Republicans in key places to observe the mail vote. That makes the mail vote completely invalid. Now, they didn't do it everywhere. They did it in big cities where they have corrupt machines that will protect them, meaning in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, in Detroit. They didn't have to do it in Chicago, in New York, or Boston. They could have. They have corrupt machines there. They did it absolutely in Phoenix, Arizona. They did it absolutely in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Republicans were shut out.
As for Sidney Powell, Tucker Carlson called her an unguided missile, dangerous as hell, and poison. Laura Ingraham called her a complete nut. No one will work with her, ditto with Rudy, to which Carlson responded, our viewers are good people and they believe it, making it clear that the viewers are being fed information that the Fox hosts themselves knew to be lunacy. And yet, here she is on Fox's air.
We've got evidence of corruption all across the country in countless districts. The machine ran an algorithm that shaved votes from Trump and awarded them to Biden. They used the machines to trash large batches of votes that should have been awarded to President Trump. And they used a machine to inject and add massive quantities of votes for Mr. Biden.
Gary Schreier, Senior Vice President of Programming for Fox Business, said Mike Lindell was on the crazy train with no brakes, and yet, you starting to notice a trend?
Well, of course, you will likely recognize our next guest. His name is Mike Lindell. He runs MyPillow. He advertises every night on this show and across Fox News. He's one of our biggest sponsors, and we are grateful for that. He is sponsoring free speech when he does it.
With this particular thing that's going on now, I've been all in trying to find the machine fraud, and we found it. We have all the evidence. So at all these outlets that have been calling me, from the Washington Post, New York Times, every outlet in the country, they go, Mike Lindell, there's no evidence, and he's making fraudulent statements. No, I have the evidence. I dare people to put it on. I dare Dominion to sue me, because then it would get out faster.
Even Fox chairman Rupert Murdoch called Trump's voter fraud claims, quote, really crazy stuff, and CEO Suzanne Scott said terrible stuff damaging everybody, I fear. So if you were wondering whether these people knew what they were doing, you don't have to guess because they quite literally admitted it. Now, in their filing, repeatedly Fox News tried to hide behind this claim of newsworthiness, releasing a statement saying, quote, there is nothing more newsworthy than covering the President of the United States and his lawyers making allegations of voter fraud. Except they didn't just cover the president making allegations of voter fraud, they perpetuated it. Fox wasn't some neutral arbiter here, they were a character in this. And in fact, when a Fox reporter did try to fact-check one of Trump's baseless tweets referring to Fox broadcasts, she was attacked. Reporter Jackie Heinrich tweeted that there was no evidence of voter fraud from Dominion, and in response, text messages show that Fox hosts and executives lobbied to get her fired. Tucker Carlson told Hannity, please get her fired, seriously, what the fuck? I'm actually shocked, it needs to stop immediately, like tonight. Carlson said he just went crazy on Executive Vice President Meade Cooper over it. Hannity said he'd already mentioned it to CEO Suzanne Scott. I just dropped a bomb. Suzanne Scott then told Fox President Jay Wallace and Senior Vice President for Corporate Communications Irene Briganti that Heinrich, quote, has serious nerve doing this, and if this gets picked up, viewers are going to be further disgusted. So when Fox tries to issue this defense that they were simply showing the news and that they can't be penalized for doing so, just know that that's not at all what they were doing. They weren't showing the news, they were shaping the news by virtue of showing one specific narrative and outright punishing reporters for deigning to show a different narrative, one that just so happened to prove to be correct. Consider too, the law will shield Fox from liability if they report on false statements, but not if they promote them. And yet, Fox News was quite literally where these promotions took place. And they took place, again, in spite of the hosts and top executives all admitting that the claims were false and that the characters spewing them were crazy. Rudy and Powell and this crazy cast of rotating characters had carte blanche to appear on Fox News, and they did. In fact, in its filing, based on testimony, Dominion said that not a single Fox witness had testified that they believed any of the allegations about Dominion. Did that stop this nonsense from being force-fed to its viewers on a nightly basis? Not a chance. Let's be clear, Fox knew what it was doing. It was hyper-aware of losing a share of its audience to far-right competitors like Newsmax and OAN, which were freely promoting these lies. And it's no coincidence that those networks are also contending with litigation from Smartmatic and Dominion for the same reason. According to court filings, Fox hosts discussed the possibility of competition to Fox emerging. Hannity said, serious money with serious distribution could be a real problem. In my humble opinion, they need to address it, but WTF do I know? Hannity went on to confirm that every day he and his team do a very deep analysis of ratings to see audience reaction to certain stories or guests, saying the ratings are important. We look at the ratings every day. He also texted Carlson and Ingram saying the network is being rejected, to which Carlson responded, I've heard from angry viewers every hour of the day all weekend, including at dinner tonight. Hannity replied, same, never before has this ever happened. In other words, Fox not only had a vested interest in tacking right to avoid losing market share to competitors like Newsmax and OAN, but they were openly, provably admitting to it. All of which is to say that Fox knew exactly what it was doing. Its hosts are on record admitting that the information they were airing was utter nonsense, and yet they made the conscious decision to feed that disinformation to their audience anyway. An audience that, as Tucker Carlson himself admitted, believed it. And yet, while they try to hide behind tepid claims that they were just mere vessels of the news, just remember, the only news they allowed on air was fake. And in the rare instances where a reporter from Fox did opt to tell the truth, the rest of the network conspired to try and have her fired. They weren't interested in promoting the news, they were interested in promoting bogus conspiracy theories and disinformation for the express purpose of not angering Trump and not losing market share. I am as big an advocate of free speech as you will ever find, but Fox is not exercising free speech. It is spewing propaganda and lies so absurd and dangerous that even their own network admitted it. Before you go, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. You can click the thumbnail right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work even further, the best way is to subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. There you can check out my interviews with major players in the world of politics, including President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Katie Porter, Jamie Raskin, and so many more. Plus other interviews that live exclusively on the podcast. That link is also right here on this screen, or just search No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen wherever you listen to podcasts. You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So we've got a bombshell issue from today's trial against Trump in New York. But first, just a reminder for those watching, Glenn and I will be doing daily comprehensive coverage of the entirety of Trump's first criminal prosecution right now. So if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. Okay, Glenn, talk about what prosecutors just revealed in court.
Brian, in case the Trump trial wasn't weird enough up in New York, it looks like Donald Trump entered into a do not snitch contract with his former chief financial officer and current criminal associate, Alan Weisselberg. And no, you can't make this stuff up. So today, the prosecutors offered into evidence, or they indicated to the judge they want to introduce into evidence, a contract, a severance contract that Trump and the Trump Organization entered into with Alan Weisselberg. And get this, Alan Weisselberg gets a $750,000 bonus if he doesn't tell on Donald Trump. No, I'm not making it up. Here is what the details of the contract involve. The severance package says, if Alan Weisselberg agrees not to cooperate with law enforcement authorities against Donald Trump or against the Trump organization, he gets 3 payments of $250,000 each. Now, in fairness, there is an exception. The exception says, well, if he is subpoenaed, then he must comply with a lawful subpoena. But he may not cooperate voluntarily and criticize or denigrate or essentially say anything bad about Donald Trump or the Trump organization. So I have characterized this as a do not snitch contract, and both parties, the prosecution and Donald Trump's defense attorneys, are arguing over whether this contract, kind of another hush money contract in substance, should be introduced into evidence before this jury that is currently trying Donald Trump for paying hush money, criminally falsifying business records to cover up the true nature of those hush money payments, all to gain unfair advantage in the 2016 presidential election. I mean, you know, this case has more twists and turns than a great adventure roller coaster.
Glenn, so as not to bury the lead here, is it a crime to tamper with a witness by inducing them not to testify with money?
It is a crime to tamper with a witness. That is, I've tried witness tampering cases. It's also a crime to, urge somebody to aid and abet a crime. But, they're trying to basically urge Alan Weisselberg not to aid and abet a law enforcement investigation or prosecution of Donald Trump. And, let's get down into kind of the criminal law weeds here. I actually don't think, as I look through what's been reported about this agreement, I don't think it is strictly speaking criminal. Here's why I say that. Because basically it says, listen, we will pay you a bonus, or we will pay you additional money as part of a severance package if you don't voluntarily cooperate with law enforcement. Now, if you have a legal obligation to testify, for example, if you're placed before a grand jury, or if you are subpoenaed to testify at trial, well, you can testify. We're not urging you to lie. We're not urging you to disobey a lawful compulsion to provide information or testimony. We are simply entering into a contract with you, an agreement whereby you get $750,000 if you don't voluntarily cooperate with law enforcement. So here's the thing, Brian. I tried to get voluntary cooperation from witnesses all the time. We would invite them to the U.S. Attorney's Office for voluntary interviews. Law enforcement would go to their homes, knock on the door, and say, listen, we'd like to interview you down at the police station or at the FBI field office. We would like you to come to the U.S. Attorney's Office and talk to the prosecutor. What people should know, because it's frankly within their rights, is they don't have to voluntarily cooperate with police, with prosecutors, with the FBI. But if there's a legal requirement or compulsion, like a grand jury subpoena or a trial court subpoena or some kind of a court order, then you do have to comply. And you can't enter into a written agreement where you will compensate somebody if they violate one of those legal duties. So, it's an ugly arrangement. It is a despicable and unseemly contract to enter into with somebody. But strictly speaking, I'm not sure that the contract in and of itself constitutes a crime. But it sure does explain why a guy like Alan Weisselberg would not make a trial appearance and testify against Donald Trump, criticize him, provide incriminating evidence against him. And that's why the prosecutors told Judge Merchan they want to introduce it into evidence, because they want to explain Alan Weisselberg's absence from the trial. Now, they don't want to call Alan Weisselberg. They've made that clear, in part because Alan Weisselberg is both a criminal associate of Donald Trump's and is a great big liar, because he's serving a sentence at Rikers Island for perjury, for having lied at Donald Trump's fraud trial to try to help Donald Trump. So the prosecutors don't want to put him on the stand. The defense attorneys are actually arguing they don't want him to testify, but they also don't want the jury to see this really ugly contract that Trump and the organization entered into with Alan Weisselberg. So lots of interesting arguments on both sides, and we can talk about how Judge Merchan has proposed sort of untying this knot and proceeding.
Okay, real quick, because I think it would introduce some poetic irony if Donald Trump has to pay out this $750,000 and the trial doesn't change at all by virtue of Weisselberg not testifying. So did we lose anything by virtue of Weisselberg not offering voluntary testimony?
We actually didn't. I don't think there's a juror in the. We actually didn't. I don't think there's a juror in the box in that New York trial who is thinking to themselves, Alan Weisselberg is one of Donald Trump's criminal associates in this hush money scheme and in the falsifying business records. So we don't really expect to see him as a witness because he was part of the crime. And I don't know whether they know he's serving time presently or not. That hasn't been introduced into evidence, but they might know about it from other sources. They're just not permitted to use it as part of their deliberations in the case. But I don't expect that the jurors are like dying to see or expecting to see Alan Weisselberg take the stand. So I don't really fully agree with the prosecutor's rationale for trying to introduce this contract to the jury, because I don't think the jury expects Weisselberg to testify. But here's what Judge Merchan has said. He said, well, first of all, have the parties asked Alan Weisselberg if he'll come in and testify, or if he'll testify under subpoena, which would be that legal compulsion? And both parties said to the judge, no, not really, which tells you everything you need to know about the fact that they don't really want Alan Weisselberg to testify. So the judge said, okay, well, here is what I am going to ask you to do. Approach Alan Weisselberg through his lawyer, ask if he's willing to come in and testify, because if he is, then you really can't introduce this contract that says he's not allowed to cooperate if, in fact, you could secure his testimony and put him on the stand. So it looks like the parties are going to take a step back. They're going to regroup. They're going to perhaps rethink the positions that they're staking out. But it may very well be that we see Alan Weisselberg bust over from Rikers Island and put on the stand in a hearing out of the presence of the jury. That happens not infrequently, Brian, when there's a legal issue that can only be resolved by having a witness on the stand and addressing whatever the legal issue is. And that is precisely what Judge Merchan just proposed. We can put him on the stand out of the hearing, out of the presence of the jury, and we will ask him, are you willing to testify? Now, I would probably bet my full buck. That's my maximum bet. I'm not a high roller. I would probably put the full buck on Alan Weisselberg if he's put in that position, saying, I am pleading the Fifth, because he undoubtedly has a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, because the evidence in this case has proved he's part of the hush money scheme and the falsifying business records, so he could potentially be on the hook for other crimes for which he hasn't yet been prosecuted, and he could incriminate himself if he were to testify. So I'm betting he would say, you know what? I'm going to decline to testify. I'm going to plead the Fifth, invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. I'm not declining to testify because of the severance contract, but I'm otherwise not going to testify. But all of these moving pieces now are kind of in play and under consideration. And on Monday, it will all come to a head, and we'll see what happens with Alan Weisselberg.
Glenn, if it is allowed for this contract to be shown to the jury, does the fact that Trump will dangle hush money for Alan Weisselberg not at least atmospherically also lead the jury to believe that it's more likely that he would use hush money for Stormy Daniels?
Absolutely, and here's what will happen.
Like this guy's like a hush money machine at this point.
He is. It's a hush money jubilee when it comes to Donald Trump. So here's what will happen. If it turns out that Judge Merchan rules the jury can see this severance agreement that requires Alan Weisselberg not to cooperate voluntarily with law enforcement authorities, he will allow it to be introduced into evidence, but it will come with what we call a limiting instruction. He will tell the jury, ladies and gentlemen, you may not use this as what we call propensity evidence. In other words, right to your point, Brian, you can't use this to say, well, he was kind of paying Alan Weisselberg hush money, so that's evidence that he probably paid Stormy Daniels hush money. That is not the purpose for which this piece of evidence is being introduced. You're only allowed to use it for the very limited purpose of explaining why Alan Weisselberg has not appeared as a witness in this case. Judges use limiting instructions all the time when a piece of evidence is admissible but is subject to multiple interpretations and perhaps subject to misuse to the detriment of the defendant. So if it comes in, it's going to come in with a limiting instruction.
But Glenn, these people are human. And if they see that Donald Trump has a propensity to write hush money contracts, isn't that going to at least subconsciously, at least atmospherically, lead them to believe that he has a higher propensity to do this?
Yeah, so this is where the common sense and the rule of law don't necessarily meet one another. They don't fit comfortably. Here's what I mean by that. In every trial, you will have evidence that gets blurted out by a witness that turns out to be inadmissible. What do we hear the judge say? Strike that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I am instructing you, you must disregard it, you must strike it from your mind, and you must not let it enter into your deliberations in this case. That is a necessary part of the practice of criminal law. It happens in virtually all criminal trials because people are human and trials are more art than science. They're unpredictable. So the reason that we have that rule in place is if we didn't, every time somebody blurted out something that was inadmissible, it would require a mistrial and you'd have to start all over again. So think about the incentive that would build into the system to have people blurting stuff out all the time. You could never try a case to fruition, to a verdict. So yes, they're human, but in my experience, Brian, when those jurors raise their right hand and swear to abide by all of the judge's instructions, they typically try their best to do it. But this is a fiction that we employ just to keep the criminal justice system up and running.
Yeah, it would be ironic, I feel like, if a document that was initially intended to help Donald Trump in trial may unto itself, just the document unto itself, not even what it was trying to protect against, which is Alan Weisselberg's testimony, but just the document actually ends up being more damaging than the testimony would have been.
Sweet karma, we call that. Sweet karma.
Well, we'll stay on top of this. Obviously, we'll have some updates here on Monday. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.